Greetings. My name is Omari, and I'm really excited to be here for the Frazier Flows presentation. This is part of the Founders Podcast. Once again, my name is Omari, and I'm the founder of Phrase Keywords. What I plan to do in this training module is just introduce phrase keywords, walk you through some fundamental concepts, and tell you a few funny stories along the way. So let's get right into it. But you know what? I almost forgot. Definitely want to show you the shirt. Now, what you see here is this image right here. I call this image the working computer whiz. And this guy is holding a tablet. That tablet is used to control all of those bots behind him. And he's using those bots for automation, for good automation. I'm not talking about all that crazy stuff you hear out there where hackers and scammers are using bots to, create fake numbers on YouTube and get checks in the mail. Not talking about those kind of bots. I don't get down like that. But I am talking about the type of bots that are used by testing teams. See, you'll as you get to know me, you'll see that I've been a tester for over 20 years. And if you don't know what a tester is, I'm going to get into that shortly. But as a tester, what I typically do is I control bots because work in the field of automation. And we use those bots to do some of the work that humans don't necessarily want to do. It's not that we're replacing humans, it's just that it's a lot of redundant, repetitive work that humans don't want to do. And so a person like myself would program the bots, just like that guy in the picture, and those bots would do some of the work, leaving the humans to have more fun. But we'll get into that shortly. I want to talk about phrase keywords in this presentation because you may not know what phrase keywords are. You might be new to this. And you're asking yourself, what does he mean phrase your flows using phrase keywords? All right, well, let's jump right into it. I have a presentation that I want to walk you through. We're going to have a great time going through it. But before I get to that, let me just welcome you to phrasekeywords.com. And there's a lot of useful information here that gets into the background of how phrase keywords were created, what they're useful for, some technical mumbo jumbo. You might not be interested in that. There's the Founders Podcast link. That's what you're watching right now. There's creative uses. We're going to get into other things that we can use phrase keywords for in that section. If you click on About, it takes you to one of my professional headshots. Man, isn't he handsome? Well, anyway, what this does is it just gives you a brief history of what I've been doing in the test automation space. Like I said, testing, we're going to get into the details of what that is if you're new to it. And you can read that blurb right there. I'm not going to bore you by reading that. And then finally, we have the contact page. This is important if you want to get in touch with me for anything. And let's get into the presentation now. I'm going to start this slideshow I put together. Actually, I want to start it from the beginning. Let's go back here. All right, here we go. Frazier flows. Beginner level. We're going to cover a lot within a short span of time. I know it says 30 minutes here, but we're probably going to get this done in 10 minutes because I'm going to be moving really fast here. Because the whole phrasing concept is not complicated. Like, I personally feel like a fifth grader could learn this. So if you're above fifth grade, and I hope you are, especially if you have a college degree, oh, come on, this is a piece of cake for you. You should get this in 5 minutes. So, what is a flow? A flow is any repeatable action, any repeatable step. I'm not talking about like a flow like pouring water down a sink. That's a water flow. I'm not talking about like a pool or pipe with water draining. That's another kind of flow. I'm not talking about a rapper spitting bars. That's a different kind of flow. What I'm talking about are repeatable actions that you would do in the real world. Like, for example, if I were to tell you, hey, I need you to go to the store, that's like a trip you would need to take from point A to point B, right? Well, we call that GPS navigation. So if I were to say, I need you to go to point A to point B, these are like five simple steps that I've placed here to show you how that would occur. You would start at point A, right? You would arrive at point B, but then there'd be steps in the middle, two, three, and four, where you'll make a right turn, a left turn at street one and two, and then you might walk 100 feet, right? That's an example of a flow in the real world where you're using GPS. Now, you might use a GPS in your car, you might use a GPS on your phone, or you might just know the steps in your mind, right? True story. I remember this time where I was using like GPS and the GPS was taking me in the wrong direction. Not sure why, but in my mind, I knew I was going in the wrong direction. I had some company with me and they saw me going in another direction and they're like, "Well, why aren't you following the GPS?" And I'm like, "I already know how to get there and something's going on with the GPS. It's giving me the wrong direction." And so I ended up going my way, and an argument started to ensue. "Oh, come on, man. You're going the wrong way. You're going to make us late, blah, blah, blah." I said, "Listen, calm down. I'm familiar with these streets. I know where I'm going." Turns out I was right. That person had to basically be like, "All right, man, you were right." So sometimes the GPS doesn't get it right. So I have this thing where I trust GPS up to a certain extent. If I know the right way to get there, I might still use the GPS. I might not. But sometimes the GPS is right because it knows the traffic pattern better than I do because it's looking at data that I don't have access to. Nevertheless, it gives you a flow. It gives you steps, turn by turn directions. And the best part about it is it puts it inside of a nice GUI interface, right? It puts it in a display that makes it easy for me to follow as I'm driving. So I don't have to look down and look at each step as you see them here. I could just simply see the turns in the display. So that's an example of a flow. What are some other examples of a flow? How about cooking? Cooking is another example of a real world flow that we typically use every day. Now, most people don't necessarily use recipes, but if you had to tell somebody how to make something and you wrote it down, this is probably how it would look. You would start with a set of ingredients. You would perform certain actions like pouring water into a bowl or adding a cup of flour to the bowl, sticking it in the oven for X amount of time, like 30 minutes at a certain temperature, in this case, 350 degrees. And then when it's done, you would take it out and you would let it cool for about 10 minutes. And then finally, you would enjoy. So as you can see here, we have these 5 steps that capture the steps for food preparation. Another real world example. Now, these are repeatable steps, right? You can hand them to anyone. You can hand them to a child. You can hand them to a senior citizen. It doesn't matter what their demographic is. If they follow these steps, they're going to get the same output. So, repeatable, reusable steps. All right. Now, this is the next real world example that is more applicable to my career dealing with websites and applications. In the website space, we would typically have a flow where we would go to a particular site, we would enter specific information, we would click some form of a button, and then we would expect the next page or some sort of a message to be displayed somewhere on the screen that we can then confirm that we entered and performed the steps properly. So in this case, we have 5 steps, right? We're going to start with the URL. This is the URL, mywebsite.com. We're going to type the data now here is David. We're going to type David into the first name, and then we're going to type Smith into the last name. And then we're going to click the submit button. So the assumption here is that at mywebsite.com, we have a form that accepts these 2 fields. It may be more fields, but in the case of our flow, we only care about the first name and the last name. And then we're going to click, assuming there's a button in there called the submit button. We're going to click that, and we're going to expect this particular outcome. David Smith is a tester is displayed on the screen. So when it comes to websites and applications, if you're using a mobile device like your smartphone, or if you're on your laptop or tablet and you're at a website, you're pretty particular, you're pretty familiar, excuse me, with using a particular flow to get things done. Now you might not have these flows documented, but they're definitely in your head. So if I was to say, for example, go to this website, it's a popular website that a lot of people use, like Priceline or Airbnb, right? If I say go to Airbnb and let's book a stay at a particular location, you could almost imagine in your mind what that would entail, right? I tell you, like, I remember a time when I was trying to decide if I was going to stay at a hotel or if I was going to use an Airbnb. And I was thinking about the different flows, and like going to Priceline just seemed a lot easier, right? To go to Priceline because all you have to do is just look on the map, pick a hotel, and boom, fill out a simple form, pay, and you have your room. Well, it turned out that Airbnb was actually a little bit easier for me at the time because I used Airbnb before, and when I logged in, it already had all my information saved from the last time. Whereas I didn't have a Priceline account, so my information wasn't saved there. So in my mind, I saw the flows, but I also saw that my data was stored in Airbnb as opposed to Priceline. So I decided to go to Airbnb flow for that reason. And it turned out, because I was in a rush, it turned out that yes, my information was still there and I was able to book the room, not room, but the Airbnb so much faster. So a lot of times we have flows in our minds. We don't realize they're there, but they're there. And if we ask to do something, we can just imagine, we can see the flow in our minds and we can do it relatively quickly once we execute the steps. So those are examples of flows. I hope I clearly articulated that. It's very simple to understand. Like I said, a fifth grader can get this. And if you're above the fifth grader, high school level or higher, if you're done college, come on, this isn't rocket science. This is basic, simple flow information. And the same is true for phrases and phrase keywords. If you've ever used a sentence, I'm sure you have, you know what I mean by short sentence structure, right? You've got those long winded people out there that you ask a simple question, they'll give you a whole book. They're like human chat GPTs. They'll give you a whole book as an answer. I'm not one of those people. I used to be, but I realized, listen, I need to shorten what I say to people so that they can get the point in a very short, concise way. So when we talk about short sentence structures, we're talking about a phrase, not a paragraph, but a phrase that is standardized for everybody. Everybody knows this phrase, and it describes a specific action. And finally, it uses brackets to pass in data. What does that mean? You're going to see. Let's go back to the prior example of GPS. Give me a second. I'm a little thirsty here. So in the case of the GPS example I used before, same 5 steps, right? We're going to go from point A to point B, but what we're going to do differently this time, we're going to encapsulate the data in the open and close bracket. Excuse me, a little thirsty here. If you notice here, there's an open and closed bracket, and at each step, the data points are encapsulated by those brackets. When you encapsulate the data this way, it is, I just can't even tell you how like powerful it is. We're gonna get into that when we get to the automation step, but just trust what I'm saying. Like the simple encapsulation of the data in these brackets, it's just mind blowing how powerful it is for controlling the robots, the bots, when we get to that stage in automation. It took me a while to figure out that brackets were the right format to use. When I was developing phrase keywords in the very beginning back in 2010, I was using a lot of different styles and approaches, and I realized parentheses aren't really good to use to encapsulate the data because we use parentheses for a lot of different things in language. And so I needed something that would stand out, that isn't used as often in our language, that could be applied to phrase keywords, that would cause the phrase keywords to stand out enough so that I could see the sentence structure and I could see what the data elements were. But then at the same time, I needed something that wasn't so complex to the human mind and the eyes to see, and brackets just perfectly fit. So after a few permutations of that, I landed on brackets and I was just thoroughly pleased. So when you talk about the phrase keyword style, you're going to notice that the pattern is we have what would be the standardized sentence structure, right? Turn right at street one, turn left at street two. That would be the sentence structure, but we're using the bracket to separate the data within that sentence structure from the rest of it. So, and then we typically bold the data so that it stands out. It's like screaming at you. Let's go to the next example. Just like the last one with food preparation, we have our steps, but notice we have it in phrase keywords format. And again, the data points are in bold so that they stand out. And finally, with website instructions, we have David Smith, we have the button name, and our David Smith is a tester in those brackets. Again, it stands out. And the power of the phrase keyword style, the format, it's just mind blowing how powerful it is for the bots. Once the bots consume this later on in this presentation, you'll see that we get into automation. The bracket just works perfectly. All right, so phrasing a flow using the PKD tool, my favorite tool. What is the PKD tool? Well, let's get into it. But in order to understand what you're seeing, I just want to touch on the topic of the phrase dictionary. Now, I mentioned previously that the phrase is what defines a phrase keyword would be the standardization of it. What I mean by that is everybody in the team, everybody in the group that is using the phrases are all going to the phrase dictionary, which is a centralized source for where the phrases are stored. So the idea is that these phrases don't ever change once they're published the first time. If they have to change, they're changed in the dictionary and everyone is made aware of that change. But they typically don't change once they're published the first time. They are the standard. Now, for example, if we want to open up a website, everyone is trained to open up the website using this phrase from the dictionary. The same with clicking a button, clicking a link, populating a list box, or even verifying that something is displayed on the screen. So there's a little bit of training necessary to go through the phrase dictionary and understand all of the different phrases that are in there and what they're used for. All right, let's exit out of here and let's get to the PKD tool. This is the PKD tool, and when you see it for the first time, this is how it should look. Now, if it looks any different, it's possible that you have a later version of the tool and it looks even better. But when you first open it, you're going to see these three sheets, the PKD sheet. And by the way, this is a Google sheet. So this is in the cloud, and you just need an internet connection and obviously the link to open it. But once you have the Google Sheet open, you should see these three tabs at the bottom, your PKD, your search, and playback. Let me explain what those three tabs are, and then we'll get into its usage. The PKD tab is the starting point for where you'll be building your flow. The search tab is useful for finding all of your different saved flows in this sheet. So you can search by keyword and it'll only show you those flows that match that, and it also provides you a link to go to that particular tab. And finally, the playback tab allows you to display your flows, and it displays step at a time, and you can control the speed by which those steps are displayed. I find this useful for giving a presentation to other members on my team. I also find it useful and somewhat entertaining for just seeing it play back in a step by step format so that each step is revealed one at a time. All right, let's get back to the PKD sheet here. Now, just like I said before, when we have our dictionary, we have what would be our standardized steps. Well, those standardized steps are displayed in the right pane here, just beneath this search box. Now, the way this works is you have your standardized steps, so you don't have to go looking anywhere else. These standardized steps here include things like interaction with the objects on a particular website page. It includes validation. So when I say validation, I mean in this example here, verifying that a particular string is displayed on the page. Well, there's different types of validations. You can validate the data in a specific edit box. You can validate that a checkbox is selected or not selected. You can validate that a list box has certain options in it. You can validate an error message, a success message. All right, that's enough for validations, but you can do a lot of different kinds of validations. Then we have phrases for screen scraping. We can just locate specific data on the screen and we can scrape it, meaning we can save that information so that we can use it later. Then we have our navigation phrases like going to a particular page in our website. We can refresh a page, we can scroll a page and do things of that nature. We can also check our login, log out status if the site has one. So if you're at like an Airbnb, I used that earlier where I used Airbnb. Well, Airbnb requires you to log in, right? So you have phrases that can check the status, and then based on the status, you can perform different things later. Then one of the most popular phrases would be to open a website using a particular URL, like in our case in the presentation, mywebsite.com. And then finally, we have a phrase for loading data. We're not going to get too much into that. That's more advanced usage, but just keep that in your mind. We can load data as well using a phrase. What I would typically do here using the PKD is I would narrow this list down, because if you notice, there was like about 50 phrases here. I would just simply type in a keyword so that this gets narrowed down to only the phrases I'm interested in. And then following these instructions, I would click the checkbox below, referring to the checkbox adjacent to the phrase here to the left. I'm going to show you an example of how this works. So let's just say I wanted to open what would be the phrase keywords website. Well, I would type website or just web and hit enter. And what happens is it narrows the list down to that particular phrase. And if I click the checkbox here, it's going to ask me for the URL of the website. So I'm going to say phrasekeywords.com and click OK. Once that happens, the tool is going to reset itself and it's going to display it as step one. And notice it populated the parameter with phrasekeywords.com. If you notice that there. So let's go to phrasekeywords.com. This is where we are here. This is what would open the home page. And let's just say I wanted to go to the contacts, which is over here to the right, and click that contacts link in the nav bar. Well, the way that I would do that is I would go to the sheet and I would type in link, and I'm going to choose the checkbox here that says click link. And when I select that, it's going to open up the pop-up and ask me, well, what do you want to, what's the name of the link that I want to use? I'm going to go back and look at my site. It's called contact. So I'm going to type in here, contact, and click OK. So it's going to add step two, click the contact link, and it resets itself. So I'm going to mimic the behaviors so that you can follow along. So now that I'm here at contact page, I'm going to scroll down and notice there's a form here. So the next thing I want to do is I want to populate the name field. So I'm going to go back to my sheet and I'm going to type edit box. Why? Because this field is an edit box. This is the type of object that it is. So is the email, so is the phone. The message area, it's much bigger and it's typically known as a text area. It's not known as an edit box. So as you begin to use the applications, you become in the websites, you become familiar with the type of object you're interacting with, and then you know what type of object to use in the PKD. So in this case, I type in edit box. I want to populate the edit box. So it's going to ask me two questions. It's going to say, do I want to give my own custom name for the edit box? And I'm going to say yes. Let's call it name, because that's what it's called here, name. And I'm going to be a little bit more specific. I'm just going to call it full name. And click OK. Then it's going to ask me for the value. So in this case, I'm going to put my name, Omari, right? And so I'm going to type in here, Omari, and click OK. And so once I do that, it's going to add that as step three, and it's going to have that information populated as step three. Now, sometimes what I noticed is that if I move too slow, it may not, because this sheet is running on macros, so it may not populate. It may not populate in a timely fashion. I may have to repeat it, and it could possibly duplicate it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do it again. I'm just going to move a little bit faster. So let's go populate edit box. I'm going to say name. Then I'm going to say Omari. And it should populate this time. There we go. And if it does that, don't worry. That's just the macro misbehaving a little bit. It's all good. All right, so let's go back to the contact form. And this time I'm just going to click the submit button. So I'm going to type button. Notice here the first option, I'm going to select that and I'm going to call it the submit button. And it's going to add it as step 4. Now I'm going to go here and I'm going to notice that if I click the submit button, it displays an error. Notice that, please fill out this field. This is what it should display, right? So I'm going to have it verify in my flow that the error message is displayed. I'm going to type in error. I'm going to select the first option, and I'm going to say the error message should say, please fill out this field. And it's going to add that as step 5. So now I have my 5 steps. They're all in phrase keyword format, and I'm done with this particular flow. What I want to do next is I'm going to save this flow into its own sheet. So I'm going to choose Save PKD. There's also a shortcut I could use. When you select Save PKD, it's going to ask me to name the flow. And I'm going to call it PK underscore contact underscore missing email. Okay. So it's going to take a few seconds to create the new sheet here. It's saving the flow, and it's going to format this flow by changing the font, by changing the colors, and also by, as I mentioned earlier, putting the actual data that's inside of the brackets, making them stand out by putting them in bold. So there I have my flow. Open the website, click the contact link, use the name edit box, into the value, my name, click the submit button, and verify that the error message is displayed. My flow is complete. Now, if I want to do the next flow, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the clear PKD macro, and it's going to ask me to confirm that I actually want to clear it, and I'm going to say yes, and then it'll go ahead and clear it. Now, I jumped ahead a little bit because the next topic is going to be naming and organizing. So let's go back to our presentation. And one of the activity that we just did is called the invalid PK contact form, where we use the phrase dictionary to create a flow, and we were expecting an error to be displayed and expecting that the form should not submit. I'm satisfied with that, and we have our flow documented. The next thing is naming our flow, and what we did is we applied a name using a naming convention. It's important to have a naming convention that makes it easy for you to identify what website you're testing, what feature in that website you're testing, and what's the actual purpose of the flow. In our case, I'm using an abbreviation for phrase keywords, PK underscore. We're on the contacts form, that's the feature underscore. And the purpose is the missing email, or in this case, the missing name, the missing whatever. But if we are testing an error message that should be displayed, then the output should be an error message from executing that flow. When we get to the bottommost step, we should verify that the error message is displayed. So that's the naming convention. And then when it comes to organizing our flows, we want to make sure that we place our flows in locations that are easy for us to find them. And again, we can use the same approach: website, feature, purpose. So in our case, the PK has a subfolder called contact, which has a subfolder called page validations, and we can place our missing email flow under page validations. And a page validation is a display that is shown to the user when the user doesn't fill in a particular required piece of information. So we were to go back to our Airbnb example, for when we are booking, let's say, a listing on Airbnb, if we don't enter our credit card information, how can we pay for it? We should expect a message to come up and say, we need your credit card information, right? And it won't allow us to book the listing without doing that. So those are flows that, as a tester, I would test those to make sure that the Airbnb website behaves as expected. And in the case of phrase keywords contact form, I'm happy to see that the contact form behaved as expected. I did not populate the email. Even if I were to go here and type in a message and click submit, it's still not letting me submit the form because the email is required. Same thing with the message. If I were to put an email in here and click submit, it will not let me move forward, which is great because that means the form is working properly. All right. The last topic I want to touch on now that we've gone through the process of creating a flow would be, drum roll please, running flows as automated scripts. Now, I'm just going to stay high level here. I'm not going to actually get into the details of an automated script, but I'm just going to explain how this is accomplished. So let's just read what this says here, and then I'm going to show you exactly what I mean. So the objective is to run flows in any automation tool. So phrase flows, which is what we just created in the PKD tool, can be executed in any automation tool that meets these two minimal requirements, just two. First requirement, it reads data from a spreadsheet. Second requirement, it can support custom library code. The good news, all automation tools as of 2023 meet these requirements. So if there's an automation tool that cannot read a spreadsheet, you're in serious trouble. And all automation tools support custom library, which means you can go in and write your own code to do specific things like reading a spreadsheet or reading a flat file. You can write your own code. It doesn't matter what language it's in. It could be in Java, it could be in Python, it can be in C sharp. Doesn't matter. But all you need to know is that it can support custom library code, right? You can write your own code. All automation tools fit that description in 2023, so we're good. So, what do I mean by that? Well, if we go to our saved PKD, we have what will be here our missing email flow. Once these are articulated in a phrase keyword format, these phrases can be used to drive automation. No other work is required. These phrases have the data already in them. It knows what website to open, it knows which link to open, it knows what name to populate in the value, it knows what button to click, and it knows what to expect after it clicks the button, an error message to be displayed. The only work that needs to be done behind the scenes is, again, supporting the custom library code that I mentioned here. So there would be some library code that would need to be developed to translate these into your automation libraries. But as far as the actual flow is concerned, no further work is required. So, what does this mean? This simply means that anyone who uses the PKD tool on your team who creates flows, they don't have to be a technical person. They could be anyone that knows how to point and click and take the name and put them inside of a flow. Anyone who can use the PKD can, in essence, drive automation. Now, that is a huge win for both the manual testing team and the automation testing team, because what this means is that any manual tester, 100% in the testing field, have a high school or college degree, right? A high school diploma or college degree. 100%. It's very rare you find someone that doesn't have one of those, right? So in the beginning, when I said a fifth grader can do this, literally a fifth grader can do this, but you're not a fifth grader. It's a high probability that you have a high school or college degree, which means that if you're a manual tester, you have the knowledge to be able to pull this off quite easily. You can use the naming convention quite easily, and you can organize your flows quite easily. So what does that mean? That means the automation team does not have to worry about the flows. They can focus on the custom library code. And then there's a harmony that happens where the manual testing team places these flows in a location, in a suite that the automation team can simply point to, and all that happens next is the automation tool imports these flows in and executes them precisely using the data displayed. So just think about that and imagine scaling up. Now you see why I say in the beginning on the site up here, phrase your flows using phrase keywords. When you phrase your flows, you're in essence doing the work of creating automation scripts simultaneously. That heavy lifting is now done at the phrase keyword level, and your automation team can focus on the library code. It's just that simple. Now, when you actually have many of these flows, you can do things like import these flows into what would be your test management tool. A lot of testing teams that use flows have a tool, like a dashboard type of a tool. One of the popular tools would be Azure DevOps or a Quality Center. There's a lot of tools out there, a Jira. You can import these quite easily using the Google Sheet, or you can save this as an Excel sheet, or you can save it as a flat file like a CSV file. And you can quite easily import these into your test management tool, and you can execute the phrases from there using the automation library. So it's a very straightforward process, and it adds to your team's productivity and efficiency when it comes to automating the flows. So I'm excited. Now, the history of this is just par excellent. I've already completed multiple proof of concepts at different scales. I've worked with small teams. They've used phrase keywords successfully. I've worked with enterprise solutions, multi-million dollar projects. They've used it successfully. I've been in situations where I was the only one using it because I was the guy responsible for automation. And I used it successfully by convincing the manual team to apply the phrase keyword format. There were other situations where I was leading an implementation and I just instructed the large manual team to use phrase keywords. And if you really just think about the scale, we had literally hundreds of tests done in a very short period of time. I've I've broken all kinds of records using this approach, and you can too. It's just a matter of applying it consistently across the board. There's, of course, small nuances. There's, of course, small things you can do in the approach to even make it more optimal, to even make it more efficient and more productive. There's an approach process to this that I'll teach you to implement once you start using phrase keywords. But in a nutshell, I think you get the gist of it. What we're doing here is we're taking the flows that may already exist, we're putting those in the phrase keyword format, and then going forward, we're creating all of our new flows in the phrase keyword format, and automation is consuming all of that, and it's just speeding up the whole process. So think of this as an accelerator. And I've actually had stakeholders refer to it as an accelerator on different projects. I remember one time there was a director, I'm not going to get into the actual company, but there's a director over the entire software development lifecycle, over the entire project, multi-million dollar project. And every time he referred to my approach, he kept referring to it as an accelerator. He would say, he would say, Omari's accelerator, excuse me, I got to just get a little water. He would say, Omari's accelerator, we need to use it because it's going to get the work done in a quarter of the time. And everybody would look at me and be like, accelerator? I'm like, he's talking about phrase keywords. Oh, okay. So it is an accelerator from that standpoint. Now, where am I taking this? We'll get into that on the next training module. We'll get deeper into some of the background story behind this. I really want to keep this pretty short so that I'm not holding too much of your time. So let me just close this by showing you something called playback. I mentioned it in the beginning. Let's actually watch playback happen. Now, when you click the playback tab, it's going to show you an empty tab, empty sheet, excuse me, and we have what would be here our saved PKD. So if I go to extensions, macros, and choose playback, watch what happens. This is pretty cool. This is one of my favorite features that I created in this tool. Here it comes. You ready? Ah, all right. This is how the automation actually runs. Did you see that? So when you're running automation, the automation is consuming one step at a time. So if you could imagine every time you saw a step, automation perform that step, the automation tool will it will capture the screen for each step that it runs, and then you'll have a nice video or you'll have some nice screenshots of the automation tool, the robot that's running these steps, performing each step one step at a time. Let's do it again, but this time we're going to do it from the search screen. So when you click on search, it allows you to search by keywords. I'm going to type contact, and it will only run in playback whatever is displayed, or I should say selected in this display. Now the open option allows me to jump back to my saved PKD, but let's go back to search, and I'm going to go to macros and choose playback. So again, it's going to go to the playback tab and it's going to run it in a top down fashion from step 1 down to step 5. Here we go. I really I really enjoy watching this because this is exactly how automation runs in the background. Step 3, step 4, and step 5. All right. Finally, I'm going to close on this note. If you're new to testing, what happens is that the automation tool will output a pass or fail result. Without a pass or fail result, how do we know if our test succeeded or not, right? Now, typically we would have a lot of passes. So if we were running 100 scripts, we expect to see all 100 pass, assuming there aren't any bugs, nothing's going wrong with our website. The red color is meant to allow it to stand out. So typically we'll see green, and then if there's something that failed, let's say this test failed, we ran it in automation, and step 5, there was no, error displayed, the form submitted, this error would not be displayed and this step would fail. So in that case, the red would stand out in our report and we would look and say, wait a minute, something failed. We would escalate it and get that resolved. Typically, before we escalate it, we will run the automation script again to make sure nothing crazy happened, and or we would run it manually to see if we could reproduce the error that happened. If we ran it manually and we can reproduce this problem of the failure, now it's time to escalate it and get that issue resolved by the development team. So there's this constant back and forth between what would be the tester who is testing the website, in this case, the contact page. I'm testing this form. There's a constant back and forth between the tester and the person who developed this form to let them know that there's an issue with this particular error message not being displayed. Now, if things go well, smoothly, and we get a green, meaning pass, then there's no need for me to inform the developer of this form here. There's no need for me to reach out. The assumption is if I don't reach out, then everything went well. And then at a certain interval, I will give the development team or that developer a summary of my results, and they'll see all the green, and they'll have confidence that the test actually succeeded, that the test suite, succeeded and no defects are there. Which lands me on my final point, confidence. How do you feel when you run a test? Well, if you're a tester and you run a test and it passes, I feel confident. How does the developer feel? If I tell the developer the test passed, now the developer feels confident. Confident in what? Confident that the functionality of his website or her website, his or her work, is exactly as planned. There's nothing going on crazy. There aren't any bugs or defects. I also like to call them dead fish in the water, but there's nothing bad there. We are confident. Why? Because we validated it. We went and tested it. And that is the fundamental role of what a tester does. So in the case of phrase keywords, if you were my tester, because I'm the one who developed this particular site, I would ask you to go to the contacts page, but really go to all the different pages and just make sure that everything works as planned, as executed, because I want to feel confident that my website doesn't have any dead fish in the water. And what you would do as my tester is you would go to my contact page among all my other pages, and you would perform a series of these tests, of these flows. You would execute a series of these flows. We call that a suite. You might prioritize what type of test you run first. You might, depending upon how granular you are, right? So, for example, I want to show you a simple example here. If I go to message and I type in, this is a test, please do not respond. As a tester, I'm being responsible here because I know that someone might get this message after it submits and they might think that I'm a real person, assuming I use someone else's name, like in the beginning, David Smith. So I'm going to be responsible here and just say, hey, this is a test. Please do not respond. And when I click submit, it clears out and a message will be sent to the phrase keyword staff, the contact us, whoever is set up to receive that message should receive a message. So I'm not just testing this form, but I'm also testing what's known as the business rule that says, hey, this form should notify, email should be received by whoever is behind this site, which in this case would be me. So I'm not just testing this form, I'm also testing the reception of the email. We call that the business rule. So again, it's not difficult to understand. And if you are in the testing field, if you're entry level or more advanced, you can quickly grasp what the power of phrase keywords and why in the beginning and why here in the tagline. It's important to understand why it's why I'm articulating phrase your flows. Well, by phrasing your flows, you are in essence turning what would be your existing flows into automation that you can then use later once you build what would be that custom automation library to support translating those phrases into actual automation code. So it's very powerful if you begin to phrase your flows early in the process as opposed to later, because the earlier you do it, the less you have to go back and redo things. You can apply certain efficiencies, nuances early in the process. You can train your team early. And then what you have in the end, you have a number of these save PKDs imported into your test management tool that you can then use at the automation level, and you can just scale up and you can just achieve unprecedented results in a fraction of the time. All right, well, that sums it up for me. That's all I wanted to show you in this particular presentation of Phrase Your Flows Founders Podcast. I want to close by also mentioning that as we go into more training modules, we'll get into more than just test flows. We'll get into user guidance. We'll get into something that I call timeline playback. And my favorite, we'll get into storyboarding. Yes, phrase keywords can be used for so much more than just testing. It can be used for instructing users to do a particular task in the real world. It can be used for something that I call timeline playback, which is fundamentally like if you want to just play back using the playback tool that I displayed, if you want to just play back a list of step one, step two, step threes, you can do that and you can apply it to what would be a timeline. So on this day we did this, on this day we did that. You can just play that back, and it's a way to present that flow. And finally, when it comes to storyboarding, the sky's the limit. We're just going to go deeper into what that means. Uh, I like to write stories, fiction-based stories. I like to tell them. So to organize my thoughts, I'm also using phrase keywords. and it's just amazing how useful it is. If we go to the PKD sheet, I want to show you something. In the settings, there's something called genre. Right now, it only has one option, but there's an ability here to change the genre to any of what would be these creative uses so that it displays different phrase keywords here, but it's using the same interface to create those flows. So you can do everything from recipes, excuse me, food preparation and recipes. What else? GPS. Like I mentioned in those examples, there's so many things you can do and apply phrase keywords to. So this genre option allows us to quickly switch to another genre. And all you would have to do, and I'll break that down in future presentations, how to do it, is import what would be another library, another phrase keyword dictionary. So I'm going to go ahead and hide that. And I'm going to hide what would be this sheet so that we only have our three sheets, three tabs here. And the great thing about using the Google Cloud approach is it auto saves. So once this sheet is created and displayed, I don't have to go try and save it. It saves it on its own. And as I'm creating more and more of these, I can also just sort of duplicate this sheet. So let's say I want to just go and change the name to email. I want to leave the name field empty. I can simply change things. I can copy. I can change the name here. So let's rename that. It's really easy to modify things and duplicate things in Google Sheets, which is one of the reasons why I built it in the Google Sheet Cloud. Because once I have a new sheet created and I go to search, well, something cool happens. Now I have my two sheets, and I quickly created another test and only had to modify one step, which was step three. And the naming convention is the same. I just had to tweak it a little bit. They're organized, and I can now import this into my test management tool, or I can play it back. So I'm going to close out now by playing it back. I love seeing this part. When you have multiple tests to play back, multiple flows to play back, watch what happens. It's going to give each one its own title. And it's just cool to look at. And again, this is the same way that your automation tool will execute it. The cool thing about some automation tools is that they will execute them in parallel. We'll get into that in another training module. But for now, let's see. It only executed one. Let me see. Ba-ba-ba. Let me clear this out and let's execute it one more time. Let's see what it does. So using the PKD tool across what would be your testing team becomes very useful. It's very easy to give each tester their own copy of the PKD. I would simply go to the name and place that tester's name up there following PKD. It's very easy to copy the whole tool. Just say make a copy and then take that copy, put it in the same location and give it a name specific to that tester. What happens is you won't have any clobbering going on because each tester has their own tool. Another benefit to using Google Clouds, Google Sheets. As you can see here in the playback, it has the title of each one and it has the steps. So it's very convenient to run playback to see your work and to proofread it to make sure everything is right. And using the phrase keyword format, the data pops out because they're bold, and it just makes it visually pleasing, and it makes it a lot easier to proof your work in the playback mode. And then when you're ready to do more, I've cleared the sheet out. This space is empty in the left pane, and I can just go create another one. by, again, applying those initial steps of searching for a step, clicking the checkbox, and modifying, tweaking the specific name of the link or the specific name of the button. It's that simple. So we've covered the basics. I think I went a little bit over 30 minutes, but I think it was well worth our time. I'm pretty excited about phrase keywords and its potential. I hope you are too. And if you want a copy of the phrase keyword designer tool, the PKD tool, all you have to do is go to contacts and fill out this simple form and say in the message that you would like to get started, what you want to use it for, and we will be in contact shortly. More than likely, what you'll get is a link to set up what would be a one-on-one 15 to 30-minute interaction where I can answer any questions you may have and I can get you set up with your own licensed PKD implementation. So, with that said, I want to thank you for joining me for this training module. This is Phrase Your Flows, and we've just completed our training module. My name is Omari Dixon, and thank you for your time. I'll see you in the next presentation. Bye bye.